Hello, hello. Welcome back to the Coach Corner. I'm Days, your host. Today we have Halle Demchuk. Halle, I said that right, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, I have a unique name, so I'm like, I need to make sure I get it right. So I'm gonna hop right into Hallie's bio because today we're talking about AAC and Gestalt language processing, and I want to get into the nuts and the bolts ASAP. So Halle is a registered SLP with the College of Audiologists and Speech Language Pathologists of Ontario and is a member of the Speech Pathology and Audiology of Canada. Halle is a proud Métis clinician born and raised in Northwestern Ontario. Halle works extensively with autistic individuals in the areas of AAC and Gestalt language processing. Halle has worked closely with Marge Blanc, super cool, who developed and published the NLA framework when creating the chocolate analogy stages of natural language acquisition. Halle is employed full time for a First Nations tribal council, providing fly in and virtual services to remote Indigenous communities, in addition to owning and operating Happy SLP therapy services. Halle developed directed speech therapy, a treatment in which she oversees a board certified music therapist and carrying out speech language pathology interventions using music. Halle SLP therapy services is a proudly neurodiverse, Indigenous owned, and 100% woman operated. I had to throw that last part in there because that's so cool, so amazing. Love what you're doing. And yeah, can you just kind of run us all through your like career journey and how Happy SLP therapy services came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for the introduction, first
Of,
off.
of course.
So, I started my career like quite a few SLPs out there. I started in the public sector, just kind of dove right in and working with a lot of different kids in a lot of different areas. And I started during COVID as well. So, that was
Oh
another
man.
added kind of treat. Hey, I worked primarily with autistic individuals coming right out of school. I didn't have what I felt like was a lot of experience or being really knowing evidence-based ways of working with
Mhm.
autistic children. But I really could see that a connection into the child's world was really, really valuable. And
Mhm.
that's kind of where I became very interested in alternative and augmentative communication. Was working this my first job. We had an augmentative and alternative communication clinic at the center I worked at. So I got a lot of experience that way. And just trying to educate myself on how are we going to work on these goals with these clients and how can AAC be useful.
Mhm.
Um, so that was like kind of my first exposure to the field. After I worked there for about a year, I switched gears and I started working for a Northern Indigenous tribal council. So that I'm still employed there full time. I work 4 days a week there now.
Wow.
Um, and in that position, we service fly-in communities that are only accessible by plane. So my furthest community that we fly to is 850 kilometers from Thunder Bay.
Wow.
So it's about a 3 hour. We take two planes there. It's about a 3 hour flight.
Whoa.
Um, yeah, yeah, and we fly on very little, really little planes, like
Yeah.
12-seater. Yeah, it's a totally different part of the field that I didn't even really know existed. I mean, I had some knowledge of it since I am from Northern Ontario. We are the biggest hub in Northern Ontario. So I did kind of know about the opportunities, but not that I could really do it as a speech language pathologist. So I've been in that position this is my third school year there. And then when I started working for the Fly In First Nations, I also started dabbling in private practice on the side just to kind of get my feet wet.
Yeah.
And I also fell in love with that part of the field as well as my work up north. So I worked for two clinics privately on the side, evenings, weekends kind of thing. Then I got to the point where I was getting more interested in AAC, more interested in Gestalt language processing. And I was having clients reach out to me personally about, wanting services. So at that point, I made a decision that, maybe I should see clients on my own, try to figure that out, try to
Mhm.
streamline my, my practice because, when you're working for different clinics, there's different hoops to jump through. There's different
Yep.
timesheets. There's different like everything. So I'm like, okay, maybe I'll try to figure out what works best for me. So last April, I guess it's almost been a year. I opened Happy
Wow.
SLP. Yeah, it's coming up on a year.
That's so
um,
exciting.
I opened up Happy SLP therapy services again, just expecting it to be me. So
Mm-hmm.
HAPPY, I'll talk a little bit about it. HAPPY is an acronym. So it stands for holistic, accepting of everyone, play-based, and integrative, meaning we integrate AAC or now music. It's a home and community-based practice. So this is my home office, as you can see behind me. All my
Yeah.
toys are here. This is actually the master bedroom in my house. So you can tell how many toys, this is what's taken up the biggest room. But so I go into my clients' homes or schools now, since I'm only working 4 days a week for the other job. Fridays I'll go into schools, and I find I actually really love that model because a lot of my kids I work with a lot of autistic kids, and
Mm-hmm.
we see carryover at home or in school that we wouldn't necessarily see in a clinic, because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
what's learned in a clinic doesn't always transfer over. Now I have 7 subcontractors working under me, or
What?
independent contractors. So I have 2 SLPs working like casually, an occupational therapist working virtually and casually, 3 communicative disorders assistants, which is our version of a speech language assistant,
Okay.
and then a music therapist as well. So it's grown like crazy in a year, and yeah, I've just been going along for the ride.
That is so inspiring. Not only that you've grown that fast, but also that you still have your 4 day a week job. Like I have been struggling with that as like someone who is, this is a whole nother podcast now, but somebody that who wants to go into private practice and pursue it fully, but also like I want to be like a part of like locally, one of our peds outpatient opened up and I was like, oh my God, I want that job like 3 days a week and then do private practice 2 days a week. So this is really inspiring to hear about. Let me ask you a little bit more about your day in the life of your current role. I mean, you kind of told us about it. So let's actually hop into educating us about fly-in services and how you kind of got involved in that.
So essentially, the tribal council that I work for. So the tribal council is kind of like in a way, like an overseeing body for 6 different like distinct communities. So they're all
Mm-hmm.
distinct First Nations communities. They all have different, dialects, religion, culture. But there's kind of like this overseeing tribal council that kind of governs or helps to govern them. They still have their independence, of course, but
Mm-hmm.
so I'm employed by that tribal council. So we have five of those communities have elementary schools. So those are the 5 schools that we work with. Um, so yeah, so I'm employed by them, which again,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like what you're talking about, I think there's a lot of also value in being an employee, right? Like when we look at
Mm-hmm.
things like, consistency and
Mm-hmm.
benefits and insurance and
Yeah.
all of those things. So I feel that like I'm in love with both parts of, or both sections, right? And it's nice having a team too. Um, but yeah, so I'm an employee there. And in that job, we service these 5 elementary schools, either in person on our fly-in trips, which happen
Mm-hmm.
usually 2 to 3 times a year to each community. So
Mm-hmm.
traveling around 10 to 15 weeks, or Monday to Thursdays, I guess, during the school
Mm-hmm.
year. It's also we primarily work with the kids in the school, so it's more of us. Even though we work all year, it's September to June is really like the times we're working directly with the kids. Um, so yeah, like day in the life is, if we're up
Mm-hmm.
north, it's just we're seeing all the kids that we can. We're trying to get assessments, reassessments done. They're very I've talked about this in some other podcasts, but all of our assessments are informal, and ones that we've developed on our own with the help of the communities, because there are no
Yeah.
standardized assessments for these kids who are in remote communities.
Yep.
So by talking to members of the community, teachers, elders, we can kind of pinpoint what the overall goals of the community are and what's important for the school, if that's literacy, if that's oral language. Some of our communities don't have certain sounds in their dialect, like I have community. So yeah, so then when we're up north, we're just kind of running a meeting with everybody, seeing as many kids as we can. And then virtually, we have a schedule where I might be on with one school in the morning, a different school in the afternoon, and then just like pulling whatever kids are available. So
It sounds so like such a unique position and like you never get bored. And I love that you created an assessment that's super specific to that community. And it's like dynamic assessment, right? And I feel like we should do a lot more of that, and I really commend you for that. Let's dive into your background with AAC. This is going to be kind of a two-part question. So tell us about your background with AAC and then your background with GLPs.
Basically what happened is I had a caseload in that children's treatment center, and a lot of my kids were on the wait list for the augmentative clinic. So I wasn't
Mm,
originally supposed to be the SLP seeing them for the augmentative clinic, but I couldn't really understand. I'm like, they're on my caseload, I'm an SLP, I can also work on augmentative communication. Like, instead of having them sit on this wait list, like, can we train me a little bit more so that I can take them off the wait list and I'm already seeing them? So it would make
right.
sense. So that's what I kind of advocated for my clients, and was able to get some more training, specifically in AAC in that role. So that was kind of like that's what kind of spearheaded me on the AAC journey. And since then, I've kind of just went with it, especially taking this job up north. Some of these communities hadn't had an SLP in a number of years, because it is harder to staff or, have that consistency of services in these far north communities, especially with COVID. So I had, in the last like 3 years that I've been working up north, we've gotten like 50 or 60 kids AAC devices.
Wow.
So I had kids as young as like grade or K4, they call it, but
Hmm.
as young as kindergarten. And then I have kids as old as grade 9. Didn't have AAC who needed it. So that just like continued on with my interest in AAC. And then it's kind of was when I started working privately. I don't know exactly how I first heard about Gestalt language processing. It honestly might have been through like Instagram or social media, or just like hearing the word come up and then realizing there was some training that I could do in that, and like maybe this would give me a framework for working with these autistic kids that I've been working with but didn't feel prepared to work with, or
Hmm.
didn't feel like I had an evidence-based way of targeting intervention and working on language development. So that was kind of, yeah, I started taking some training in that, and then it really clicked. Like, I feel like that's what a lot of GLP clinicians will say is like, you kind of hear about it and you're like, now I can't unhear it. Like, now I hear Gestalts everywhere and I'm like, oh, that's where that's from, or I got to do some digging here. And then the whole like bridging AAC and GLP together, I feel like that's something I'm still figuring out. I think a
Hmm.
lot of clinicians are, and just kind of figuring out, okay, how can we modify these programs that are meant for analytic language processors? How can we adapt them while still keeping the motor planning the same? To me, that's like really important. I use LAMP, Words for Life, a lot, so I
Hmm.
do really like know the importance of motor planning. I've seen it so many times. It's funny because when I use LAMP, I know it quite well, but when I'm
Hmm.
using it, the iPad's facing away from me, like it's facing the child, right? So like my motor plan is like upside down on LAMP. So I'll look at it like straight, like normal, and I'm like, I don't know where things are because I have to do it upside down. So we know that motor planning works and it's important, and we need it um for when we get further on in the stages as well, when we're like isolating single words, but also adapting and adding in gestalts kind of as we can. So I've experimented in a few different ways, either having like kind of a gestalts folder or putting a gestalt close to the core word, which is what I tend to prefer to do, and I see it working pretty well with clients. But I think a lot of it is just being open to modifying those programs, being open to like not being a purist, I guess. Like, there's times some
Hmm.
people are like, okay, you can't move anything. And I think we need to take that with evidence-based practice and be like, okay, but how are we including the child's perspective? How are we including the family's perspective? And that includes, modifying when needed.
Hey there, Coach Free Crew. Dej here. I am so excited to share this episode's sponsor with you. And I wouldn't skip if I were you. Our sponsor's got a special Coach Free Crew bonus, so keep on listening. Picture yourself in your therapy room or clinical rounds, and instead of feeling overwhelmed or frustrated, you feel confident and connected. You're probably thinking, well, how is that? I'm glad you asked. It's through the power of compassionate communication. And Golden State of Mind PD has the roadmap. In this brand new course, Shift Makers 1.0, Embracing Connection, Transforming Conflict, you will be equipped with the tools and frameworks you need to feel more confident and empowered to advocate for yourself and others, know what to say and how to say it, effectively diffuse and resolve conflict, grow and deepen your professional relationships, and more. We're talking about real world solutions for real world challenges. No more feeling stuck in those tough conversations with parents or colleagues. No more wondering if you're making a difference. With these evidence based, proven techniques, you'll build stronger relationships, create a supportive environment, and empower your clients like never before. But here's the best part. Use the code CoachReadCorner or the link in the show notes for 20% off the course. So if you're ready to transform your work environment, your relationships, and your impact, then this course is for you. Transform your career, transform your life. That's such a good point about the motor planning piece. I used to be so afraid of LAMP. And then when I took, just because it looks like so overwhelming, right, when you first see it. And then I took a training, I took two trainings actually. And I was like, oh my gosh, it was like a light bulb went off. And I was like, this is amazing. Because it's like you said, like if I get in a car and everyone moves around my stick shift and my steering wheel or whatever, I'm all over the place, right? Like, you can't drive somebody else's car because you have a motor plan intact for your car. So, so, so important. Talk us through kind of like that general assessment and interventions when you're considering AAC for a Gestalt language.
Yeah, so my intake would be like a lot of conversation with the parents, asking about how, or the caregiver, whoever is involved in the child's life,
Mhm.
asking about, how they communicate. Do they communicate with echolalia? Do they script from? And I would kind of phrase that in different ways. Like,
Yeah.
they might not be familiar with the word echolalia, so I might say, like, do they script? Do they
Mhm.
repeat things after you or after others?
Mhm.
Do they take things from TV shows or media and repeat those phrases? So kind of trying to get to the bottom if there is potentially some echolalia or delayed echolalia, immediate echolalia. I would say like most autistic children I work with are Gestalt language processors, like just even
Mhm.
not even having like a stat or a number, but when you kind of dig and
Mhm.
ask that question in different ways, you'll kind of get an answer from the parents. Whereas if you just ask like, oh, are they a Gestalt language processor? Not everyone knows what that means, right?
Right.
So kind of digging and asking in different ways, like, are they using scripting or echolalia or repeating after you? So I would first kind of do like a intake with the family, chat about that. That's also one of the reasons I did create the chocolate analogy
Mhm.
with Marge Blanc. Shout out to her for just answering my Facebook message and being like, "Hey, do you mind helping me with this?" But I wanted a visual for caregivers or for educators because it is a new way of thinking about language development, and so, visuals help me, visuals help our kids, visuals
Yes.
help a lot of people. So sometimes I'll show them like even like some visuals with the chocolate analogy and ask like, is that something you've seen? Do you hear these scripts or these things that are used in different contexts? And then usually like again, my assessments are just very much play based,
Mhm.
observing the child beginning, um, using their in my intake, I ask about interest, so using their interest to see if that will help just spark some more communication. And then I usually have like an AAC device out and just start experimenting with the program and seeing if there's any interest to it. I might
Mhm.
try a few different apps to see if the child like gravitates more towards one than the other. And another big thing I've talked to with parents is the idea of honoring total communication,
Mhm.
because sometimes it can be, although we know that there's no research indicating that using AAC can hinder verbal communication, a lot of parents still don't know that.
Yeah.
So having a conversation about, this is another tool, like we are going to be working on, if the child does have some verbal gestalts, like we're going to be working on modeling language verbally, but also showing on the iPad so that the child's able to have some sort of reliable communication, no matter if they're dysregulated or if words aren't accessible. We're going to honor whatever is easiest for them at that time. So I think talking about that is really is a really important thing too, with kind of just getting people on board and just having that discussion. And then another thing I like to think about is that there's a lot of similarities between modeling verbally and modeling on the device, because in both of those cases it's modeling
Yeah.
without expectation. So I feel like drawing that, like, we're just offering phrases, or we're just offering options on AAC, and we're not drilling the child to say a certain thing or to press a certain button. We're
Yeah.
just filling the environment with different language opportunities, whether that's verbally or through the device. And I feel like that's a really helpful thing for getting people on board too, with like not quizzing, because we do see
Yeah.
that a lot as speech pathologists. We see quizzing on device, or even with Gestalt language processors, we have to be really careful not to be pushing for a child to say a certain phrase. We're just offering it. So I'd like to like use that kind of language too. Like, we're just offering communication options.
I love how you tapped into the education piece and how you do have to modify, the terms that you use. We can't go in talking about GLP, AAC. They're gonna be like, oh, whoa, 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 what are all these acronyms, right? And sometimes the same thing with other professionals. And so, do you collaborate with any other professionals?
Yeah, so I would say the professional that I collaborate the most with would be, like, other than my other speech pathologists and TDAs, would be my music therapist,
Hmm.
which is so awesome. She's taken GLP training, and we do like a lot of co-treating or joint sessions, so that I can make sure that when she's targeting my goals under music directed speech therapy, that she's prepared to do that, because it is also different than music therapy. But I've learned a ton from her as well, just in terms of like using intonation, using interest, just adapting and making things up as you go.
Hmm.
So I definitely collaborate a lot with her. And then a little bit as well with occupational therapy. I'd like to collaborate more, like to have more occupational therapists to work with, but I'm sure
Yeah,
like in your area, there's such a shortage right now of clinicians, and that's
for
seems to be
sure.
like almost the limiting factor, right? Is just job shortages,
Yeah, I
really,
was just
or
talking
worker
to
shortages.
Yeah, I was just talking to an OT about this, and she said that's a big reason as to why she went telehealth, because she felt like she had so much more access to providers. And like when she did telehealth in the schools, like she was like being able to collaborate so much more with different disciplines. And I was like, that's like a really good point. So, yeah, although I love my in person, but telehealth is a really good tool for that as well. So, you talked about you want to collaborate more with OTs. Is there any other profession that you feel like you would want?
I also have collaborated, with some BCBAs. I feel like
Mhm.
that's an area that Gestalt language processing, a lot of BCBAs aren't necessarily familiar with Gestalt language processing, and it's
Yeah.
different than maybe like some of their background schooling. So
Mhm.
I've been able to work with a few, and it's just kind of, I feel like, we never want to go in and just say like, this is the way that things are done, this is the new way of doing things. Like, I always want to kind of come in and say like, this is what the current research is showing us. These are some, I love how you're using narrative, narrating what the child's doing, but you can even do it from their perspective, and it's going to be probably picked up even easier. So I think like just being careful, like just cognizant of your wording when you're going in, and the
Yeah.
recommendations you're giving, just because I have stuff to learn from BCBAs have stuff to learn from us. And I think sometimes the field can feel so polarizing, when
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are well meaning clinicians and we want the best for our kids, but we have really different educational backgrounds. And it's learning, how can we bridge that gap? How can we collaborate together to, better the outcomes for the children we're working with?
And that's like the whole point of this podcast, right? Like you just put it all into like one sentence for me. Yeah, I remember I was doing a lot of research on what I didn't know was Gestalt language processing maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Like before the meaningful speech course was really popular, I didn't know about it, right? And so I was doing a lot of research, and I found out, like, I found Marge Blanc's research, and I was telling the BCBA about it, and she was like, oh my goodness, that's totally this kid. And I'm like, yes. And so we started, this is before anything, right? We started using like his scripts, and it was like, it was just such a light bulb moment. And then I started knowing, oh, there's a course about this. And so, yeah, it was just like such a great thing. And it really is like you were so right when you said earlier, you can't unhear it. Right. And then when you
Yeah,
start to,
yeah.
yeah. And when you start to educate others on it, they're like, oh my gosh, I can't unhear it now. And so, yeah, it's a really great thing that, like you said, shout out to Marge Blanc about, and a shout out to all these people who are creating, great resources. Like, you have a free resource about this, and I'm just really excited about it. So how do you deal with like people who have not really bought into that collaboration piece? Because things like AAC and Gestalt language processing, you really need that buy-in and that carryover at home and at school and with different providers. So how have you dealt with, if any, some kind of pushback with that?
Yeah, I think like kind of what we talked about, one of the things being just starting with small steps. I think a small step for, or what feels like a small step for us might be a big step for a parent. Even
Hmm.
just, introducing a device. That might be, for us, that's like we do that every day maybe. But for a parent, that can be life changing. That can be, maybe they also never expected their child to use a communication device. So I think just like having the most important thing is having that good relationship, building a solid relationship with the client and the family or whoever you're working with first, um, so that they know that you're not just going to like give them this thing and then like send them out to like go do figure it out themselves. Like, we're going to figure this out together. We're going to take baby steps and we're going to figure this out together. So I think that's really helpful for buy-in. um, Another thing I liked is to provide, free resources, because of
Hmm.
course, like there are also paid courses which are great for clinicians wanting to dive, into Gestalt language processing, but having the ability to have free information as well is really valuable for other clinicians or other areas like OTs or
Yeah.
PTs or even pediatricians and things like that. So that was one of the reasons that I wanted to work with the medical school when they had reached out to me in Thunder Bay here,
Hmm.
um, about doing a presentation on Gestalt language processing, because I felt like that would be beneficial to a bunch of different healthcare professionals, which was
Yeah.
what the purpose of the training was to be available to different healthcare professionals. So I had like dietitians on in that presentation. I
Wow.
had BCBAs, I had behavior therapists, but a variety of different healthcare professionals, which is because in reality, a dietitian probably isn't going to take a course on GLP,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean they're never going to come into contact with a GLP.
For sure.
So if they have, just having that base knowledge, um, can just kind of help get the ideas out there more and also more accepted, right? Like,
Hmm.
sometimes we don't also want to gatekeep this
Yeah.
this knowledge either. And again, I'm not saying that those courses are the courses that are out there are amazing, and I've taken
Hmm.
them, and there's a lot of time and effort that goes into making a course. But I figured, like, hey, if I'm already doing this presentation, they're already putting it on YouTube. Like, that was already part of it. So I'm like, why don't I just share that with other people so that they can also share that resource with parents or with other professionals. So that's kind of how that came about. And now, even since having that presentation done, I did that in last month, I guess, February. It's like a nice resource that I've been sending out to parents or just other professionals.
Hmm.
Like, even for me, I'm like, I can just send you this video of me talking for an hour, so and then I don't have to do it. So that's one of the things I think helps with buy-in. Same with like the chocolate analogy.
Hmm.
And the other thing I want to mention is in that 1 hour webinar, I do talk a lot about the research, like, which I know for some people is probably like, oh, this is so dry. But I think it's really important as clinicians, or that if we're talking about this way of this seemingly new type of language development, it's not new. If you watch the webinar, you'll see all the research, but to like really understand like this isn't new, and there is research backing all of this up, and to synthesize that in a way that is easy to understand, and you don't have to read a number of articles to get the gist of the research. So that
Hmm.
really was my intention with that presentation as well, was to like provide the research in a way that parents or professionals could easily digest and not have to read a bunch of articles. um
Yeah. And I think you need both, right? I think you need some free resources so that people like, okay, this is kind of the bare bones, this is the overview of it. Now let me go deep dive, get this like course loaded with, I think she does like examples in there and videos and all kinds of things, right? And so I think you need both. And I think I have it literally in one of my tabs on like all my little different browsers going. I'm like, I'm gonna watch this video because it's so good, and I just really want to get like the overview. And before I dive deep into her course, I don't really have a lot of clients in that space right now, like who are Gestalt language processors. But I know, like, I've only been an SLP for coming up on 2 years, so I know I will see a lot of GLPs in my lifetime. So I definitely want to get the course, and I plan on starting with yours and then getting the other course. So I'm really excited about it. So tell everyone where they can find more of you, more of Happy SLP, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I'm Happy SLP on Instagram, but again, that's HAEPI. So
Mhm.
your IPA is coming in handy here. It's like the only time I use IPA is to
Yes,
spell my name.
that's what I thought it was. I didn't know it was an acronym.
Yeah, yeah, it's in IPA and it's an acronym.
Love it.
So on Instagram, and then I also my website is happyslp.ca. And on there, I have the free download of the chocolate analogy handout form, which is great for parents or professionals, as well as a link to that free 1 hour webinar.
Awesome. And then if anyone wants to learn more about Gestalt language processing, after they take your free course, and then AAC, are there any places that you want to send them if they want to do a little bit more digging?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've taken a number of GLP courses, and I think they all provide really great information and also different information. Like I
Hmm.
feel like it's nice to kind of hear it from a number of different people. So
Hmm.
I've taken the natural communication course, the meaningful speech course, the meaningful speech and GLP course,
Hmm.
and then Marge Blanc's course through Northern Speech Services Sciences,
Maybe
NSS.
services. I
Anyways,
don't know.
services, yeah. Like I should know because I'm pretty sure it's pretty close to here. Like it's like northern USA. But yeah, so her course as well. Those are really great places also to start. And then in terms of AAC, most of the apps will have a training option. Like LAMP
Hmm.
has a training option, and I know like the other different programs do as well. So it's always worth reaching out to see if there's training options. And sometimes you can even get the device or the apps for free after taking
Yeah.
those trainings or for discounted. So that's another kind of nice benefit too.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for all this great information. I'll have to have you on again just to talk a little bit more about that fly-in thing you got going on over there. I think that's so cool, and we need to learn about more things like that. And yeah, so thank you so, so much. I'll have all of her information in the show notes. And thank you so much, Holly.
Thank you.